here we are. This is S.x Love Psychedelics, and I'm your host, Dr. Kat. Bringing you psychosexual conversations that will leave you intellectually turned on and hungry for more. So you're hearing men also learning about, around sex here. Yes. So yes, there's such a big space for porn and erotica, or I don't even know if it would be called erotica, but porn that's directed towards straight heterosexual men, but it's not necessarily ethical or healthy or, contributing to I guess the ways that our bodies naturally function, both for men and for women. So I think this is really important to include them. I don't know. What's your demographic like for Dipsea?
Our demographic is overwhelmingly people who identify as women. And it's like 90% women. And then I want to say it's like 10% non-binary, that leaves a really small percentage of men. Basically, it's like, let's say like 2% of paying listeners are men. I need to actually make that math out, but something like that. And that makes sense. I mean, our content is like overwhelmingly from the perspective of someone who's in a largely described as female body, and like that's been intentional because we feel that audience is so deeply underserved. And we definitely have content that's like her plus them, or them plus them content. It's a smaller part of the library, but it's growing. That said, I think like kind of like how Bumble talks about like taking a female first approach to dating can actually like really influence dating for everyone and have a better impact on men as well. Like that's definitely how we see it with Dipsea. So it's less that we want to create like a exclusive experience and more that we want to create an experience that's really clear about who could benefit the most, and then hope that effect kind of radiates out.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. Do you ever feel like, or, again, coming back to this idea of porn, and I think one of the more common arguments about porn is that it creates unrealistic expectations, whether with the story or with the sex itself and how, sex functions there. Do you see audio erotica contribute to that, or how do you see that in relationship?
It's a great question. We think that we've taken a little bit of like a tough job on, which is it's hard to be moral arbiters in a world as like gray as sex, right? Like, like is a rape fantasy a dangerous fantasy, or is that an acceptable fantasy? Like those are like really complicated questions that we have kind of participated in only by omission, right? So like there aren't rape fantasies, for example, on Dipsea. That's a choice that we've made. We're not necessarily saying that we think that that's like patently wrong. We just haven't figured out a way to make that work inside of our ecosystem of what our content is. And so like these are really, really challenging questions that no one is going to think we have 100% gotten right, but we take a lot of care and we think a lot about how to kind of participate positively in the world of sexuality, knowing that what people watch, listen to, experience will impact the world. That's just true. So that's been like a really interesting line to walk. And so some of the things that we just decided is like sex positivity is going to be written into our stories as much as we can. So things like abstracting bodily forms is a big way of doing that. Like you want to know how the bodies are lining up so you can imagine the sex, but we're not like her enormous breasts, like, right? Like we're not like being super clear about bodies, because you want to be able to put yourself in the story, which porn has never allowed people to do. And that can be really off-putting. It can be really othering. It can feel really upsetting. Another thing we do is we make sure that consent is a part of the story, but also in its natural ways makes sense. So if you're like episode 15 of a monogamous couple, then like consent can be much more like a than like a can I do this with you now? Or like there's like such subtler ways that we can do this that feel natural and native, even though they're always part of the story. And safe sex is part of that too. Like, are you hearing someone rustle a condom because it's a first date story? Like, absolutely you are. Is everyone picking up on that in the heat of the story? I'm not sure, but it is in there. So those are like these subtle choices that in our experience, when we first started Dipsea, like porn was not paying attention to. And we do not like monolithically believe that porn is bad, but obviously there is a lot of bad porn. And we wanted to be so clear that this is like so obviously something different, partly because the ethicality isn't even in question. Like there aren't people who are in environments being asked to have sex with one another to make this content. It's actors and voice booths. And that takes out so much of the complexity of vulnerable environments and vulnerable people. We want to make this feel like people are listening and they're like not having any of those thoughts at all. And that can be very freeing.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Once was with a partner and I was like, let's watch porn together. And then he pulled up Pornhub and I felt this visceral contraction in my body. And I was like, I can't get out of my head. We didn't even like get our downloads. I was like, I can't get out of my head. I don't know that this is ethical. And then I was going down
You're
this
like, I know this was my idea, but I changed my mind. Revert.
Well, in that sense, I shared some of my favorite directors, and Erica Lust was one of my first ones who turned me on to ethical porn. But I don't think many people stop to consider whether something is ethical. Maybe you can share what people can look for that would help them to know whether this is sourcing it from a place that is ethical.
Totally. So number one, audio erotica. Please listen to Dipsea. It is a safe space for you. But besides that plug, if you're watching like graphic visual porn, then the number one way that you can ensure that's ethical is whether you're paying for it. Overwhelmingly, people do not pay for porn. And so that just gives you a glimpse into how dangerous the space is and how unclear that is. So Erica Lust, you are paying for. That's paid for content.
Yes.
And that already is a different world where like if you are directly funding the payment of, creators, contributors, and sex workers, then you're already in a very different universe than the vast majority of the internet.
Yeah. And do you have any other directors that you really like or that you
Not necessarily. I think audio has always been the medium that I'm most interested by, and I've stuck to that lane.
Yeah. What do you think it is about the audio aspect of it?
Yeah. So, 6 years ago when Faye and I were first concepting what Dipsea could be, Headspace was really taking off, Calm was really taking off. And we just realized that these apps were using audio not just to like share information like a podcast, but they were like changing how you felt. So you would listen in the morning and meditate, and like ideally you'd take that calm with you throughout the day. And that like feeling, that idea that audio can create feeling was just very exciting to me. And then the more I thought about it, it's like audio is this amazing trifecta in that it's super immersive. So it helps you to feel like you have to do some work to imagine, and therefore you're less distracted by what's around you or distracted by your own thoughts. Like you can really like be in it. It's fundamentally imaginative. So like you are deciding what the room looks like. You are deciding what the bed is like. You are deciding what the characters look like. You are deciding whether you want to put yourself in there or be the voyeur. Like you get to do that yourself. And then lastly, it's so intimate. And the best way that I can say this, it's like audio is the closest we can come to hearing our own thoughts. It's like how we process our own thoughts. So it feels so personal. Any story that you listen to, you're going to have a different experience than I would have.
Yeah.
And that just feels, like beautiful, for lack of a better word, like really erotic.
Yeah. And I love to hear your sensory experiences there as you're talking about this, because I think one of the big arguments around fantasy, or it was especially when I was first starting studying Tantra like 10 years ago, was, fantasy gets you in your head. But here you're talking about these very sensory experiences that, our bodies can respond to.
It's a really good point. I think that we often say at Dipsea that we wanted to take this like mind first approach to sexuality because we felt that women were really getting shorthanded by not having tools that attended to the fact that sex is such a mental experience. Like you can hand someone a vibrator and be like, go to town, and like you can have pleasure, but you're not necessarily like solving the problem that people have more broadly in their lives, which is like, we hear this over and over. Like, I don't know if I enjoy sex as much as I should. I don't know if my libido is high enough. Maybe something's wrong with me. Do I like my partner? Do we have the right chemistry? Like people are so concerned because there's not a lot of information sharing. It's all kind of behind a veil that they're like normal and that things are okay. And so story is such a powerful kind of like anecdote or antidote to a lot of that, right? It like takes it out in the open. It helps you like hear what it could be, and it helps you tune into your own mind. And then it's not just purely a heady experience that like lets you tap into your body because you feel safe, because you feel calmed down, because you feel present. And so, it's like those systems are like always working together.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And we many of the world spends most of their time in their head first. So it's like
Oh yeah,
starting there
can
to bring
relate.
it down. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And especially like I'm thinking of so many, I primarily work with individuals who've experienced sexual trauma. So their bodies were not a safe place to be. And so
totally.
imagining that that would be like a more accessible step for them to access their body rather than to go cold straight into the body.
That's exactly right. And some of the feedback that we hear that I feel most touched by is people who are sexual assault survivors who are like, you know, I kind of thought that my options were just to like get okay. And then I
Yeah.
was supposed to just stay at okay
Yeah.
versus like first get okay and then remember the joy and pleasure possible. And that there's like a next step. You don't just have to linger at like good enough or linger at okay.
Yeah, yeah, or jump straight to body love to recognize that there's a whole process in between there.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, that was fun. Thanks for tuning in, lovers. And if you want to experience more ecstasy and sexual liberation, head over to s.xlovepsychedelics.com and learn about how you can join me for any one of my online or live events. And while you're there, grab my free guide on sex and psychedelics. Remember, this podcast is for entertainment and educational purposes only. Please contact your healthcare provider and local law before pursuing any of the products or psychedelics discussed. And one final note here. I make this show specifically for you. If you're loving the show, then be sure to leave me a review in iTunes or Spotify to let me know. Happy to be here and happy to serve. I'll see you next time on S.x Love Psychedelics.